Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the first edition of a brand new show. So, how did this show get the name? Well, it came from meetings every couple of weeks of the three American guys living in Yalta meeting at a local pizza establishment. We would talk about politics, geopolitics. We would talk about our experiences of life here in Crimea in the Russian Federation. Now, out of those meetings came the idea for this new and very unique show. We are going to provide you with insights, news, and analysis you won't get anywhere else on all things Russian, from life here, the economy, the culture, how to visit Russia, and how to come and live here. We're also going to talk about what's in the news, about the special military operation in Ukraine, and other political and geopolitical events. So who are these three amigos? We'll begin introducing ourselves to you with Richard Dihlman. Richard, give us a brief background, what you did before you came here.
Hi there, Regis. Yeah, my name is Richard Dihlman. I'm originally from Western Central Connecticut, and before I retired in Russia, I ran a small business for 35 years in Connecticut, and that sort of stuff. Yeah, and then around 2013, I met my wife, my present wife. And that was the impetus to basically for me to come to Russia eventually.
Well, let's hear about that courtship, Richard, because your wife wasn't just some American chick.
No, she was. I had originally met her on a Herbalife forum. We were on an Herbalife forum, and we were discussing Herbalife products and sales for Herbalife and the benefits of dieting and stuff like that. And it just one thing led to another, and we started Skyping quite a lot together and talking to each other in the early 2013s and stuff. And one thing led to another, and I had been talking to her for daily, probably since around early March of 2013, and then around the end of June, she asked me, "What are you doing in September? Why don't you meet me in Thailand, in Phuket, in Thailand?" So I said to myself, "Yeah, why not? Let's just do that." I had never been to Thailand before, and we met in Thailand, and we had a real good time and everything. And I was over in Thailand about 18 days, and then she went back to Russia. She lived in the Krasnoyarsk region of southern Siberia, and I went back to Connecticut. And right again, we were back doing the same thing, on Skype every day, talking to each other and everything. And yeah, we really hit it off real well, and we really missed each other. And come around December of that year, 2013, she said, "Why don't you come to Russia and visit me?" So I said, "Wow, boy, that's a big." I had never been to Russia. I didn't speak Russian or nothing like that. But I said, "Okay, sure, let me try that out." I wanted to retire anyways, or at least semi-retire, because I was just sick and tired of working. But the way things were going in America, it didn't look like I could really have a full-time retirement. So around December, I said, "Yeah, all right." So finally, I got my passport, a dual entry passport, as a matter of fact, because we had planned on doing a little traveling. So I went to Russia for the first time on March 3rd and stayed till April 15th, and of 2014.
Okay, Richard,
And,
I'm gonna interrupt you there, because the next question that I'm going to ask to each of us is how, when, and why we came to Russia. So now we're going to introduce Peter Frohwein. Peter, take it away.
Okay. Well, I my family is originally from Iowa, but in the early '60s, my we moved to Huntsville, Alabama, and that's where I grew up. And I went to school there, went to high school, and then college. Got a degree in mathematics. Then became a computer engineer. I worked in the military industrial complex for 7 years and decided that wasn't for me. And then I moved down to North Florida, and I was in Florida for 10 years. And then I moved back up to Huntsville. And then fast forward to 2020, I was working at a small college as an engineering advisor at a small college in Southern Illinois. And when the health emergency hit, I started questioning, things just didn't make any sense to me. I think that was the beginning of my journey to kind of wake up to what was going on in the world. And from there, I just kept diving deeper and deeper into, okay, what is the U.S. government doing? And I just became, first of all, kind of interested. It's like, okay, financially, it doesn't look like things are stable in the U.S. And from that point on, I became more disillusioned with what was going on. And then, when the war in Ukraine started, I started looking into it more deeply, and I really didn't agree with what our government was doing at all. Um, so at that point, I really started looking around, going, okay, I'm really not, I don't believe anything our government is saying to us anymore. Um, and I started really kind of thinking, I'm gonna move out of the U.S., but I really wasn't sure where. And the more research I did, I really looked kind of focused on Russia. It's like, well, Russia is moving in the right direction, whereas things in the U.S. weren't moving in the right direction and are not moving in the right direction. So I don't know, for 2 years I was talking to friends and family and going, "Hey, do you not see what I'm seeing?" And they basically they're just in denial. And maybe I had a couple friends who were awake to what was going on, but the majority of my friends and family are just, don't believe what's going on in the US and really don't understand what's going on outside the US. So finally in 2023, I decided, okay, I'm going to make the move to Russia. Well, I'd met a friend online who he's an American, but he lives in Siberia. And he had made the offer to different people. He said, "Hey, if anyone wants to come to Russia, he can come visit me and come, I can kind of show them around." Well, it's basically, I kind of took him up on the offer. So since he was in Siberia, I took a long route. Um, I started out my journey in Atlanta, flew to Qatar, then to Hong Kong, and then to Ulaanbaatar in Mongolia.
Okay,
And
Peter,
then,
I'm going to interrupt you there because we're going to come back to when and why we came to
okay,
Russia. Well, thank you for that brief interruption, that brief introduction. Most everybody who's watching it knows who I am. Uh, like the two of you, an American. Um, my background has been very varied. I was educated and ordained as a Roman Catholic priest. Uh, I did that for 14 years after studying in Rome for 4 years to get a postgraduate degree in theology. I later uh, married and had a family, raised them in Arizona for 23 years. I moved back to my home state of Maine, um, where life really dramatically changed. And it changed when I had the opportunity to go to Jeju Island in South Korea to make a film, actually to document the protest, which turned out to be a major film about the untold history of the United States in South Korea before the Korean War. Well, anyway, from there, I got employment back in Maine, and it was a political appointment in the government. An elected governor, a Republican radical, Paul LePage, ended up cleaning house in all of the government agencies, as is common everywhere. And so after 4 years, I lost my job. I was 66 years old and did not want to look for another job, so I retired, basically on Social Security and two small pensions from 4 years in Arizona state government and these 4 years in Maine state government. And that set my life on another trajectory. As everybody who's watching this, who's watched my shows in the past, they know the history of me coming here. So when it's my turn, I'll be very brief about that. But that's basically the background. Now I'm going to turn it over to Richard. And Richard, pick it up where you and your wife, Elvira, now got together, Jesus, of all places, in Siberia. What the heck, Pete?
Yeah.
Most people would come to Moscow or
Yeah.
Petersburg, and the lucky ones would come here to Crimea, but we don't know too many others that are here in Crimea. So tell us a little bit more about when and why you decided to move to Siberia.
Well, like I said, we were pretty crazy about each other, and we got back in July of that year, actually 11 years ago, it would be this July, we got married. And well, my wife was, she was a retired instructor from a university in Krasnoyarsk for 33 years, so she was retired, but she was running three fabric shops at the time, and so when we decided to get married, was thinking about should we live in the United States or so. But the way it worked out, it was just much more feasible, and I could definitely retire just on the Social Security that I had at the time to live in Siberia. I know a lot of people say, "Well, who retires and goes to Siberia?" Well, me, I did. And but to tell you the truth, I spent 7.5 years in Siberia in Krasnoyarsk in the Khakassia region, and I absolutely loved it. I had such a great experience living in the big city for a number of months, and also living in a dacha, or a bigger dacha we had in a village 240 miles south in the Khakassia region, where we grew our own food. Grew lots and lots of vegetables. We had a huge vegetable garden, and just had fun and hung around with the cows and sheep and thousands of sheep and the horses and everything.
Hey, wait a minute.
And I lived in a village. A Russian village, and that was a heck of an experience.
Tell me about your best friend, the horse.
Oh yeah, Ararat, the horse. Yes, I got to be a real good friend of this, a beautiful black Arabian horse. Me and my dog would go out, and they used to stake the horse pretty much right outside of our yard. They'd stake the horse so he could just eat the grass around there, of course. So we would just go over and visit Ararat when he was around there. But he was a really cool guy.
So really Richard, I want to know, did you decide to leave the United States for like political reasons, or was that part of it way back then?
Well, there was a slight impetus to do that, yes, because I was getting into trouble because I had, come along around 2006 or 2005, 2006. I got a computer, and that set me on a thing. And I used to go to a gym all the time, work out. And this guy says to me, he says, you you got to watch this movie. It was called In Plain Sight. It was by Dave Von Kleist, and I didn't know Dave Von Kleist personally, but he was a radio disc jockey in the Waterbury, Connecticut region where I live, so I kind of knew of him. But he's a really he used to play the bars too. He was a acoustic guitarist and a really talented guy. So I watched that movie, and that changed. That really, I always knew my whole life after the Kennedy assassination that there was something really wrong with the narratives we were fed. Vietnam, you could go along, you start really looking at the things that happened, and I never believed a lot of the stuff, the weaponized healthcare and stuff like that. I knew something was really wrong with the United States. But after I saw that Dave Von Kleist movie, the 911 action, the whole idea of 911 and who was really involved really woke me up. That movie woke me up to the Zionist connection in New York and the traitors in the United States government to actually, and tomorrow is 911. And I anybody that's listening to this, please check out the PNAC documents, Project for New American Century, or check out the Building 7 collapse later that day on 911. These are anomalies that stick out like something so outrageous that once you realize and just look at a few of these things, you understand the lies of 911 and how a breakaway society, a breakaway satanic cult, basically took kind of like, just opened it up on 911 and said, here we are, we're creating a new reality. You can get into it deeply, but that's the situation there. And once I realized that, I researched especially Zionist connection on 911 and also what they call the CAFR, the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report of the state of Connecticut, because around the same time, around 2010, 2011, they were talking about $3 billion deficits and all this stuff, and and hammering the people pretty hard with increased taxes and stuff for deficits and stuff. And when you look at the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report of the state of Connecticut, you'll realize that there, as a matter of fact, the most recent one is $53 billion in there. So they call it the rainy day fund. So when I started exposing these things, especially going to legislative meetings and stuff, they didn't like it, and I started getting gang stalked over the deal. Where I was getting warned about being a loose cannon and I should keep my mouth shut if I know what's good for me. And I had a couple of vehicles damaged real bad, and just had some blowback from it. So that was kind of an impetus too. You can't even speak the truth no more. You can't divulge the real truth in the United States because you will pay for it one way or another. That was the situation there on that. Yeah, that was an impetus to get for me to say the hell with this. Or it's a situation too. When I went to Russia, and I said, oh my God, it was nice. I mean, I walked in the Krasnoyarsk, and that place was boom. I mean, boom. And the district my wife lived in, she owned her own apartment. So when we looked, it was really a nice place to live. It was, and so there was a lot of impetus for me. I wasn't meeting anybody for 20 years. I was, divorced, and I was pretty much single for 20 years. I had met a few women girlfriends or something, but nothing ever panned out. So, I didn't want to be alone, So I met somebody, we fell in love, and that just seemed to be the thing to do, It was just give it a try. What the hell? Most of it happened is good. I could go back to Connecticut, So
all right,
that's what,
Richard, that's great.
that's the way it worked out.
Thanks so much for that really kind of very personal background. Uh, Peter, uh, your story is quite a bit different, but in many senses very similar. Take it away. When and why and how did you end up coming to Russia via a very different route through Siberia? Peter, take it away.
Well, by 2023, I was fairly convinced of things of I basically from 2020 to 2023, I was doing a lot of research to understand what was going on. And I found a number of things going on that I really didn't like. One is the U.S. economy was in much worse shape than the government was telling us. So started doing more of a deep dive and really started to understand the government was just not being honest with anybody. And so, like I said, I started looking around going, okay, are there places in the world that are more stable and that the governments are being honest? And it kept, I looked all around and Russia was the one. It's like, okay, the Russian leadership is very intelligent, very smart, very wise. The Russian economy is extremely stable, counter to what the U.S. government and U.S. media and Western media say about the Russian economy. And actually, something I hadn't mentioned before is I had actually met a Russian woman online and kind of struck up a friendship with her. And she actually lives in Spain. And I was telling her, why are you in Spain? You need to go back and you need to live in Russia. Well, that friendship didn't go, very far, but that was kind of the also a kind of an um, incentive for me to, okay, I want to do more research on Russia and really decided this is a country I wanted to move to. So, like I said, I found a guy who was an American who had moved to Russia, and he now lives in Siberia near Irkutsk and Lake Baikal. And he had extended an invitation to different people. He just said, "Hey," he has a YouTube channel, and said, "Hey, if you want to come, I'll host you and show you around." So I talked to him and I said, "Yeah, I'd like to come and stay with you a couple weeks and kind of get you acclimated and decide." So, like I said, I came to Russia through Mongolia. We took the train from Ulaanbaatar in Mongolia up to Irkutsk, and then things took a turn that I didn't expect. Instead of being with him for 2 weeks, he said, you can stay here for 3 days. I'm like, 3 days. So I had to kind of, my original intent was I was thinking about moving to Vladivostok on the far, far east. But because I was only going to be there in Irkutsk for 3 days, I'm like, okay, I need to make a decision fairly quick here. And it didn't seem like Irkutsk or Vladivostok was the right place. So I had actually made a friend here in um, Crimea who lives in Alupka, which is on the coast on the Black Sea. And I contacted him and said, "Hey, do you happen to know if there's any rental apartments in your area?" He said, "Oh, well, actually, I have a rental apartment here on right next to my house that he owns." And so they said, "Okay, how much?" And we came to an agreement. And I said, "Okay, I'm coming to Crimea." So I got in a plane in Irkutsk, flew to was it Ekaterinburg? I know I'm not saying that exactly correct. And from Ekaterinburg to flew to Sochi, and then got on a train in Sochi and took the train from Sochi up to Simferopol, and then got a taxi from Simferopol down to Alupka. and I was there in Aluka for 9 months, and it just seemed like it was not the right situation for me. But during that time, I had visited here Yalta a number of times because there's a Russian language teacher who I was going to work on my Russian. And so I would come into Yalta a couple days a week, and I really like Yalta. It's like, okay, Yalta feels more like home to me. So after 9 months in Alupka, I actually moved to Yalta and had a little trouble because it was when I moved, it was late spring, early summer, which is kind of high, starting to go into the high season here because the Yalta is kind of like, or actually, things in Russia on the Black Sea is kind of like Russia's Florida. So there's a lot of tourists who come here, in late spring and definitely during the summer. So it's a lot like Florida in that people come to visit. So I had some trouble finding a place for the first 3 or 4 months, but finally found an apartment which in a great location. And actually in that process of the 9 months in Aluka, I was able to get my temporary residency status. And that's what my status is right now. And then next year I'll apply for permanent residency. And then hopefully eventually like to, I think about the quickest you can get citizenship is around 5 years. I think that's the normal time frame. But um, the longer I've been in Russia, um, the things that I thought about Russia are confirmed. It's still a very Christian country. I would say Russia today is like U.S. was in the 1950s. It's still very conservative, very traditional. Um, their kids here can play in the street unattended, yeah, of all ages. It's just a very healthy atmosphere for families. And I already had this sense before I moved to Russia, but it's been great to confirm these things about Russia. And I actually, the longer I'm here, the more I basically have fallen in love with the country and the Russian people. And it really is an amazing country. And I believe there's something I said to the Russian border guards when I came from Mongolia into Russia. They were asking me, "Why are you coming to Russia?" And I said, well, I believe Russia will be the best country to live in for the next 100 years. They were shocked. They're like, okay, there's this American who just said he thinks they thought I was crazy. Like, no, but everything I've seen in the last, I guess I've been now in Russia 26 months, confirms that thinking. That I, even more so today, the things that I see in Russia confirms that Russia has everything it needs to be a, a really, really great country, including, Russia's a member of the BRICS alliance, which I think is a brilliant move on Russia's part to economically, politically. It's just a great alliance. And um, I really think a lot of Russia now, and I'm sad, very sad to see what's going on in America right now
Okay, Peter,
because
I'm going to interrupt you. We're going to come back to that. Uh,
okay.
we're going to ask for our comments on life here in Russia, and then we'll finish with some comments on how we view what's going on, not only in the United States, but all across the EU. So, again, I repeat, most everybody watching this, except for some newcomers, um, they know why I came here, and it was to complete a film that was about the what I thought was an imminent threat of a nuclear war between the United States and Russia. So in 2016, I had to come here for myself to find out the truth. And in a month here, a little less than a month, I'd visited Moscow, St. Petersburg, and Crimea because I had to find out the truth about Crimea returning to Russia in 2014. My eyes were opened. I could not believe what I found. I documented that in a very short video called Je suis Russia. And then I had the opportunity to come back two more times in 2018 and 2019 to document the travels of a citizen diplomacy group, two of them, that came here for a month. There were 40 people in each group. And so not only did I get to travel around to different cities, but the people in this group were all sent to other regions of Russia. And so I documented their experience. Again, not only were my eyes opened wide, I learned so much more about Russia. And then in 2019, I was not able to replace my automobile. I was living in Maine, and because of the harsh winters and the salt they put on the roads, my used Subaru had rusted out, and I could no longer register it. Without a car in a place like Maine, which is rural, um, you're not able to move. And I was still very active, documenting environmental issues, anti-war issues, the whole climate thing, Occupy movement. And I realized that on my retirement and two small pensions from Arizona and Maine, I could afford to live comfortably but frugally in Russia, and especially in Yalta, without a car. And so that's kind of how and why and when I came to Russia. I got here 1 week before the health emergency, and I've been here ever
Oh,
since. I think in future shows, we're probably going to talk about many of our experiences uh, dealing with the bureaucracy, not the people, the bureaucracy. Uh, how to get this temporary residency, which Peter just talked about. It took me a couple of years. You know, you had to leave the country every 6 months and then come back. And then when your visa expired, you had to leave the country, go to a U.S. embassy somewhere. I was going to Yerevan and Abkhazia, and this was terribly expensive and problematic. It just caused so much stress dealing with that bureaucracy. Um, so I went through temporary residency and have had permanent residency for several months now. And the really important thing, which was another thing that sold me on Russia, is with permanent residency came free health care. And I had been living here without health care for 5 years. So that's in brief my background and why I came here. Let's talk a little bit now, beginning with you, Richard, on comments on life here, how you have found it. Was it difficult to adapt? Uh, um, and, you know, in both places, you were in Siberia for several years. You've been now here in Yalta, in our little slice of paradise. So tell us a little bit about how you have found life in Russia. Did you have trouble with the bureaucracy, language, food, whatever?
well, yeah. Actually, actually, October will be 4 years. I've been living in the Yalta area. Um, no, actually, yeah, no. I loved it. I just was, even in Siberia, I was just and really enamored with the people and stuff. I didn't, I learned it. It was like a everyday learning experience with the language, and it still is with me there. But the people were really great. They really like Americans, and you know, learning put up with the cold weather in Siberia. That was a task, but something that, I learned to live with, after about the first year. It does get very cold there, but no, I just loved it. Like you said, we'd have to go out every 6 months and stuff, but it was kind of exciting too, because every 6 months we'd go to Turkey or we'd go to Thailand or someplace like that. So uh, it is about, because this 6 months comes up on you quick. But that happened four times. So like around 2 years I had to go through that. But no, basically once we started going into the FMS and what they call, FMS, the immigrational system. Once the people know you and stuff, it gets easier and easier. The first couple times you go there, it's like, oh my God, it's like, oh, I gotta have to go through stand in line for 3 or 4 hours. But I kind of lucked out. We kind of lucked out in Krasnoyarsk, because once I started going through FMS, a couple of times we went there, and there was a couple of just one times you have to like wait in line for 5 hours and stuff like that. But about the third time I went to FMS, my wife's cousin was there. So, and she saw her, and it's like, so ever since that time, she said, "Oh, just don't do that. Just let me know when you're going to come, or call me. We'll have lunch, or I'll meet you after lunch." And so we would just go, and she would just I wouldn't wait on lines or nothing. And so she would just take us right through. So it was so easy after that. It was just like a godsend when her cousin was there. So, it's like any place else, you get to know somebody knows somebody else, and bada boom, that made it very easy, that situation there. And now it's like, wow, it's really easy. I only have to really go once a year, just check in, say, hey, hi, I'm here now, and they'll just stamp your thing, and the people are really nice. Once you're there, after a while, they just get this situation. And it's like, oh my God, we were going to have to put up with this guy, so we might as well just be friends with him. That's almost the way it is. You'll run into situations, a few pitfalls or something when you first start, but it gets easier and easier. That's all I could say. That was my experience. FMS been great, really. Uh, haven't had really any problems with them there. I had one little thing down in Acacia, but that was straightened out real quick. But after being there 11 years, I have I've never been stopped by a policeman and asked to see my ID or anything like that. Nothing like that. I have been stopped. Have been stopped by police down in Acacia one time, because I pull out. You're supposed. I didn't signal when I was supposed to, so they pulled me over. But it was kind of funny too, because the two guys were looking at my Connecticut driver's license, and they go, "Oh, this guy's from Germany." They thought I was from Germany. So one guy was telling my wife. My wife translated me later. The guy saying, "Oh, this is just way too much paperwork. We'll just let him go." That's what happened there. They didn't want to mess with trying to translate my driver's license. But no,
So,
I haven't had
Richard,
no, I haven't had
Richard,
no problems at all.
well, you made a good point that you have an automobile and you've been driving ever since you've been here, up in Siberia and here
Yeah.
in Crimea and Yalta. But I know that you recently have applied for Russian passport citizenship. How has that gone?
I'm still waiting. I'm still waiting for. It could be any day now. It could be any day now. Uh,
Now, what
it's,
happens? What
it's three
happens?
months. Yeah.
What happens when you get that Russian passport? Did you have to give up your American citizenship?
No, 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 not at all. You're just a dual citizen. Yeah.
Okay, so culturally now, there's a big difference between Siberia and Crimea. Um, how have you found life here? Has it been easy for you getting around? Has it been easy for you, you know, doing cultural
Oh yeah.
things, visiting different places? You're married to a Russian, so the language is
Yeah.
not a big problem for you. Tell me a little bit how you've acclimated.
Well, in Crimea, it's real easy because lots of people speak English or somewhat here, and like if you go to a lot of the dvorets, the palaces and stuff, and the other stuff, and a lot of stuff's in English there. So yeah, no, I found being here in Crimea no problem at all, not at all. Now in Siberia, nobody speaks English, nobody. I've met people in Siberia that said they never met an American. I was the first American ever. Seriously. So yeah, it's a little different down there, but you know, um, no, being in Yalta here and the greater Yalta area, this is a wonderful, wonderful place to retire. I mean, you know, I was in my 60s when I was in Siberia. Now I'm in my later 70s, so. Uh, the medical facilities are all right here, and this is one heck of a beautiful place to retire. That's all I got to say. It's just really worked out well retiring here. I'm glad we made the tour. The moved here.
Richard,
I'm real glad.
I think I'm going to edit this. I don't want American people hearing any of this because I don't want any more of them to come here.
Yeah, no, yeah. I was just back in America for a few days 20 days in late July and August, and I showed friends of mine movies and stuff, and they all said, "Oh my God, I want to come there. They want to come." And I was telling them they like the electrical rates and stuff like that, and they're saying, "You got to be kidding me." That's another situation. When you go to another country, you don't know, but it's like I feel bad in America. I really do. It's sad. It's sad the way it's gone to such such extreme lengths. Even like now, the people in Connecticut, because I was just there, they're screaming and howling about the electric rates, going up, way, way up, and it's affected them in a lot of different ways. But they allow it. They allow it. And I tell
Yeah.
them, I live in a small flat here. Me and my wife own a flat, apartment here. But when I tell them my electric bill is like around 400 rubles a month, and you're looking at 80 rubles to a dollar, you got about $6.50 for your electric bill. They go, oh my God, it's stuff like that. But by Russian standards here in Yalta, it's very expensive. You know that. But for us, we're living on American dollars with Social Security and other pensions. It's beautiful. It's like, wow.
Well,
You
thanks
got the
for that,
Black Sea
Richard.
here in the mountains, Black Sea
We'll,
in the mountains, like
we'll get to
California.
talk. We'll get to talk a lot more about that in future
Yeah.
shows. But I want to go to Peter now. Peter, uh, what kind of comments would you have about life here in the Russian Federation? But basically, you've been here most of the time in Crimea. What would be your comments?
Wow. I'd say I've thought about this. I'd say about 90% of the Russian culture is much like American culture. So the transition really hasn't been extreme. I'd say about that. Now the 10%, that's an interesting 10% because Russians, they did definitely have their way of doing things, their own culture. I feel a lot at home here in Russia because, like I said, I lived for 10 years in North Florida, and Yalta here on the Black Sea is the climate is almost identical to northern Florida. In fact, it feels so beautiful here that I call where I call it the Russian Riviera. Um, Now it's interesting because the beaches here are little rock pebbles. They're round pebbles, and it's not sandy beach like northern Florida is. But it's really an amazing culture here. The people, the Russians are. It's very different from what the Western media portrays Russians as cold and dangerous, and they're not that at all. They're very warm. Now, um, Russians that you don't know are very cautious. And so it takes some time to for them to warm up to you. But once a Russian warms up to you, you're like family. But it's the um, Yalta is interesting because it's a fairly old settlement. And this is even where the Yalta Conference was with Stalin, Roosevelt, and Churchill after World War II. So it has some history. When you say Yalta, people right away think of the Yalta Conference, but it's really a cool city in that, like I said, I love warmer weather. Um, the weather here is almost identical to northern Florida weather, even in the winter. Because in North Florida, it can get pretty chilly in the winter too. But to the living standards, it's very much a modern. I mean, there's older buildings here, so there's historical buildings here, but they have modern buildings here too. And the cost of living here is it's much less. If I lived in Florida in a location relative to the beach, um, my rent would be, I don't know, $2,000 or $3,000 a month. And here my rent is very reasonable. It's under, I don't know, it's between 300 and 500 a month. And utilities are dirt cheap here relative to the US. I think my total utility bill here in the middle of the summer has been, I don't know, less than $40 if you convert it from rubles to dollars. The food cost is a lot of the food is much less than the food in the US. Now, there's some things that are higher. And in the 2 years I've been here, there's been a little bit of inflation. So things have gone up a little bit, but nothing like the US. I was just looking at where I'd left in the US 2 years ago. I could go to the local Walmart and buy a couple steaks for, I think, around $12 or in that range. Now it's double in the US. I just looked at that. It's like, wow. So cost of living in the US is literally for some food is doubled. Here I think maybe the food has gone up, some of it 10 or 20%. But the food here is fresher. The Russian government has outlawed GMO food. So, which is, I think, great because I don't like genetically modified, food at all. I don't trust it. So, if the food here is fresher, it's cleaner, it's plentiful. I think that it's interesting. People in the West think the sanctions have done nothing here. I can get anything I want here, and the stores. If you go to the grocery store, all the shelves are full. And you can even get American products here, anything you want. Um, and then, things you can't get locally, you've got wild berries and ozone, which are Russia's version of Amazon. And I've ordered so many things off of ozone that the local ozone knows me well. Because once or twice a week, I'm up at the ozone um, shop getting, picking up a package or getting a number of things. So yeah, it's very and it's easy to get around. There's a local buses are very easy, very cheap. I mean, Lord, I think it's 25 or 30 rubles for a bus ride, that's 25 or 30 cents uh, in that range. So it's very cheap. It's a great city to walk around in. A lot of sidewalks. You can actually, and it's very, very safe here too. Which that's the other thing. I feel safer and freer here than I did in the U.S. And I've never been in the 26 months that I've been here walked by police all the time. They patrol, not a lot, but once in a while you see, you know, police patrolling, and they walk. They don't a lot of well, there are some in cars, but they most of the ones that I've seen walk. Never been stopped, and I'll tell you, I clearly look like an American when I'm I don't there maybe it's my manner or maybe it's how I dress, but when Russians see me, they're trying to figure out, most of them get it right away, like, okay, this is not Russian. And you can see in their mind, they're trying to figure out where and so I'm clearly American. But they're very welcoming, very curious. And when they hear me speak, I can be walking and speaking English, and people are shocked because I think right now there are only three Americans in Yalta, and we're the three. I think I don't think there are any more Americans here. So it's and I've in the whole time I've been here, I've maybe experienced one interaction that was not real friendly. Now it wasn't violent. It was just um, it was actually when I came into Irkutsk. I was flying out of the Irkutsk airport, and I was there, and there was a Russian soldier, and he was asking me, and at first he thought I was German. He asked me, in Russian, "Are you German?" I said, "No, I'm from the U.S." And his response wasn't real kind. Thankfully, I wasn't understanding a lot of what he said. He wasn't in my face or anything. I could just tell that he was not happy with what our government was doing. But all the other interactions I've had here in Russia have been very kind, very welcoming, very curious. Like, okay, why did you come to Russia? What do you like about Russia? And I tell them, like, here in Yalta, I feel at home because it's here in Yalta. It's very much like Florida, um, and I love the sea. So the Black Sea is great, and it's a very healthy environment, a very healthy culture. You can any day that I go out and go to the store or go to a cafe. There's families, there's children in being babies in baby strollers. It's very common to see, like every day I'll see multiple babies in baby strollers with families, people on vacation, and I find that amazing too. There's some people from all over Russia who come long distances to be on vacation here in Yalta and in the Black Sea. I mean, I have some friends who travel from every year from Siberia, but it's more common here to see people from St. Petersburg or Moscow. And still, that's a pretty good distance from us here in Crimea. And it's a very big tourist area in the summer. And I think this summer was a record number of people here in Yalta. And I could tell, I mean, a couple of weeks, 2 or 3 weeks ago, the embankment, there were thousands of people out at night just walking and enjoying their vacation. And it was very, very crowded, but, very festive, fun, enjoyable to see, all these people on vacation. So it is, in that way, it's a lot like Florida in the summer that people go to the beach and enjoy but their summer vacations.
Well, Peter, thanks for that. And I'm kind of wondering whether it's a good idea to do this show. It sounds like the Chamber of Commerce, for crying out loud, here in Russia, trying to attract foreigners to come live here. And that's not our hope, I know, but what it's really doing is giving people some insight from we three Americans who have been here for a very short period of time, like you, Peter, almost 2 years. Richard, my God, I don't know what it is now, how long you've been here, but it's well over a decade. Myself, I'm coming up on 9 years visiting here, but almost 6 years living here. Now, I want to finish the show. We're coming up on an hour. Why we wanted to do this show. And both of you have alluded to the situation in the United States, but I know in almost all of our meetings that we've had every couple of weeks for the last couple of years, we've constantly talked about the power and the effect of US propaganda that has brainwashed most Americans, which has caused extreme Russophobia and the ability to even talk to family and friends about it. And so in future shows, we're going to focus on some real life stuff. We're going to focus on political issues. We're going to focus on how we view what is happening not only in our home country, but also across the EU. We're going to focus on geopolitical happenings, which are coming at us so fast, it's unbelievable. Peter mentioned the BRICS, the recent Shanghai Cooperation Organization that met in China, which was really an earth-shaking event. We're going to talk about what's really happening in Ukraine with the special military operation. And I think what's really going to be important about this show, and I know that Richard and Peter agree with me, is that almost everything that people in America, the United States, and across Europe really have no idea what we've been trying to describe. They have no idea about life here in Russia. They have no idea about the politics. They have no idea about Putin. As soon as you mention his name, you start hearing war criminals, you start hearing dictator. And so we're going to address these issues. We're also going to address some economic issues. We've alluded to some of it here in Russia. Peter and Richard are very much into financial and economic issues, the exchange rates, how to move money from the United States to Russia. It's a real problem and challenge for all of us here because credit cards don't work anymore because of the sanctions. We are going to talk about the sanctions. We're going to talk about things in a way that most of you have never heard. And in my previous shows, I've had guests on. Some of them have been Russian, but most have been Americans who have been liberated or awakened from the propaganda. Others have been Europeans. Now, this show, The Three Amigos, is going to focus on all of those things. And I don't think you're going to get this kind of insight and analysis and commentary anywhere else. So I want to thank Richard and Peter for agreeing to do this with me. We should have been doing it, I think, a long time ago. But I also want to thank everybody who's watching. I hope, and we hope, you'll continue to tune in and follow us in these next weeks and months ahead.